The scream that tore through the Montana wilderness made every living creature within a mile radius fall silent, and in that terrible quiet, Emma Townsend realized she had made the worst mistake of her life by leaving the wagon train. She had been so angry with her aunt, so frustrated by the constant criticism and interference, that she had grabbed her bedroll and stormed off into the darkening forest without considering the consequences. Now, as the sun disappeared behind the jagged peaks and shadows stretched like grasping fingers across the pine needle carpet, Emma understood that pride was a luxury no one could afford in the territory of Montana in 1883. The temperature had already dropped 10 degrees since she had made her dramatic exit 2 hours ago, and she could hear sounds in the underbrush that made her heart hammer against her ribs. Emma was 22 years old and should have known better. She had survived the journey from Philadelphia with her aunt and uncle, endured the cramped conditions of the train west, and managed the bone-rattling discomfort of the covered wagon for 3 weeks. She was supposed to be resilient, adaptable, ready for the challenges of frontier life. Instead, here she was, lost and alone, with nothing but a thin blanket and her own stubborn pride to keep her warm. She tried to retrace her steps, but every tree looked identical in the failing light. The forest seemed to shift and rearrange itself, mocking her attempts to find the path back to the wagon train. Emma's practical wool dress snagged on brambles, and her carefully pinned hair had come loose, tumbling around her shoulders in a mess of dark brown waves. She must look like a madwoman, she thought bitterly, wandering alone through the wilderness. As full darkness descended, Emma knew she needed to stop moving before she injured herself, or became even more hopelessly lost. She found a small clearing surrounded by large boulders and decided it would have to do. With shaking hands, she gathered what dry wood she could find in the darkness, grateful that her uncle had at least taught her the basics of fire building. The matches in her dress pocket were her only stroke of luck in this entire disaster. The fire caught on her third attempt, and the small flames seemed to push back the oppressive darkness just enough for Emma to breathe a little easier. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and sat with her back against the largest boulder, trying not to think about what her aunt and uncle must be thinking. They would be frantic with worry by now. The wagon master would probably send out a search party at first light, but that meant surviving an entire night alone in the Montana wilderness. Emma had nearly convinced herself that she could manage this, that she would simply stay awake all night and wait for rescue when she heard the first howl. It started low and mournful, somewhere off to her left, and was answered by another howl from the right, then another and another, until the night air vibrated with the chorus of wolves calling to each other in the darkness. Her blood turned to ice in her veins. Emma had heard stories about wolves from the other travelers, tales meant to frighten children into obedience. She had dismissed them as exaggerations, frontier tall tales designed to pass the time on the long journey west. Now, listening to those haunting calls growing closer, she realized with sick certainty that the stories had not been exaggerations at all. The howls circled around her position, and Emma caught glimpses of reflected firelight in pairs of yellow eyes that appeared and disappeared between the trees. She fed more wood onto her fire with trembling hands, remembering someone saying that wolves feared flames. The fire blazed higher, but the eyes did not retreat. If anything, they seemed to multiply, a pack gathering to assess this unexpected intrusion into their hunting grounds. Emma had never felt so utterly, completely alone. She thought about her parents, dead from cholera 5 years ago. She thought about her aunt and uncle, who had taken her in despite their limited means and were trying to make a new start in the frontier town of Dillon, Montana. She thought about all the things she had wanted to do with her life, all the experiences she would never have because of her own foolish temper. One of the wolves stepped into the ring of firelight, a massive gray beast with intelligent eyes that studied her with unnerving focus. Emma pressed herself harder against the boulder, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The wolf's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that gleamed white in the firelight. Behind it, she could see the shapes of at least a dozen more pack members, circling, waiting. That was when she heard the hoofbeats. They came fast and hard, crashing through the underbrush with purpose. The wolves scattered briefly, startled by the sudden noise, and then Emma saw him, a man on horseback, riding into her small clearing like something out of the adventure novels she used to sneak from her father's library. He was tall in the saddle, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. In his hands, he carried a rifle, which he fired once into the air. The shot cracked through the night like thunder, and several of the wolves yelped and bolted. But the pack leader, that massive gray beast, held its ground, hackles raised, growling low in its throat. The rider dismounted in one smooth motion, never taking his eyes off the wolf. "Stay close," he said, his voice calm and steady despite the danger. "I'll keep them away." Emma scrambled to her feet, clutching her blanket, and moved toward this stranger who represented her only chance of survival. He stepped between her and the wolves, his presence solid and reassuring. He fired another shot, this time closer to the pack leader, and the wolf finally retreated, disappearing into the darkness with a final, defiant snarl. For several long minutes, the man stood perfectly still, listening. Emma could hear the wolves moving through the forest, their positions marked by the snap of twigs and the rustle of undergrowth. The pack was regrouping, deciding whether this new threat was worth challenging. "We need to move," the man said quietly. "They won't give up that easily. My camp is about a mile west of here, better protected." "I don't even know who you are," Emma managed to say, though her voice shook. He turned to look at her for the first time, and even in the uncertain firelight, she could see that he had a lean, weathered face with serious gray eyes. He looked to be in his mid-20s with several days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. "Name's Harrison Zane," he said, "and right now, that's all you need to know. Can you ride?" "I can manage," Emma said, lifting her chin despite her fear. Something that might have been approval flickered across Harrison's face. He kicked dirt over her small fire, then helped her onto his horse before swinging up behind her. Emma found herself pressed against his chest, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, and somehow that rhythmic sound calmed her frayed nerves more effectively than any words could have. They rode through the darkness with the wolves following at a distance. Emma could hear them pacing alongside, keeping just out of rifle range. Harrison seemed unconcerned, guiding his horse with easy confidence through terrain that looked identical to her untrained eyes. He must know these woods intimately, she realized, to navigate so surely in the dark. His camp, when they reached it, was exactly what he had promised. Better protected. Harrison had set up his bedroll in a natural depression between two large rock formations that created a barrier on three sides. The fourth side faced a small stream, and he had built his fire in the center of the space. As soon as they arrived, Harrison helped Emma down from the horse, then quickly built up the fire until it roared, creating a wall of light and heat that the wolves would be reluctant to cross. The pack circled the camp, and Emma could see them clearly now. At least 15 wolves, maybe more, moving like gray ghosts through the trees. Their eyes reflected the firelight, creating an eerie, almost hypnotic effect. They heard the wolves circle the camp, Emma whispered, more to herself than to Harrison, her mind struggling to process the surreal danger of her situation. Harrison glanced at her, then back at the circling pack. "They're hunting," he said matter-of-factly. "There's been a harsh winter, and food is scarce. They're desperate, which makes them dangerous." He settled down near the fire, his rifle across his knees, and gestured for Emma to sit. "Stay close. I'll keep them away." Those words, spoken with such quiet confidence, made something shift in Emma's chest. This stranger, this man she had known for less than an hour, was putting himself between her and death without hesitation. She sat down near him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, and pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm Emma Townsend," she said, feeling that introductions were overdue. "I was with a wagon train headed to Dillon. I left because I was angry with my aunt, and then I got lost." Harrison's expression didn't change, but she thought she detected a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "Dillon's where I'm headed eventually," he said. "I've been out checking my trap lines, hunting. I work out of there most of the winter." "You're a trapper?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. She had heard about mountain men and trappers, solitary figures who made their living from the wilderness. "Among other things," Harrison replied. "I guide hunting parties in the fall, do some work for the ranches in summer, whatever pays." He fed another log to the fire. "You picked a bad night to go walking alone. This pack has been ranging wider than usual. I've been tracking them for 3 days." Emma felt a flush of shame heat her cheeks. "I know it was foolish. I just needed to get away, to clear my head. And I didn't think about how dark it would get, or how quickly I would lose the trail. The wilderness doesn't care about our moods," Harrison said, but his tone wasn't unkind. Out here, a mistake like that can kill you. You're lucky I was close enough to hear when the wolves started gathering. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wolves prowling outside the ring of firelight. Emma studied Harrison's profile in the dancing shadows. He had strong features, a straight nose, and a firm jawline that suggested stubbornness. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused from hard work, but they handled the rifle with practiced ease. There was something deeply competent about him, a quality that inspired trust. "How did you know where to find me?" Emma asked eventually. "I didn't, not exactly," Harrison admitted. "I heard the pack howling and knew they had found something. Could have been a deer, could have been a person. I came to investigate." He looked at her directly. "Lucky for you, it was the latter." "Lucky for me indeed," Emma agreed quietly. "I thought I was going to die tonight." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "The wilderness is harsh, but it's not cruel. Wolves don't kill for sport. They were just hungry, and you were alone and vulnerable. In their position, any predator would have done the same." Emma appreciated that he didn't try to frighten her further or lecture her about her stupidity. He simply stated facts, allowing her to draw her own conclusions. She found herself relaxing slightly despite the wolves still circling their camp. "Will they stay all night?" she asked. "Probably," Harrison said. "But they won't attack, not with this fire burning. Come morning, they'll move on to easier prey." He shifted position, settling more comfortably against the rock wall. "You should try to get some sleep. We'll head back to find your wagon train at first light." "I don't think I can sleep," Emma confessed. "Every time I close my eyes, I see those yellow eyes staring at me." Harrison considered this, then reached over and pulled his saddle closer to where Emma sat. "Use this as a pillow," he said, "and move closer to the fire. The warmth will help." Emma did as he suggested, grateful for the small comforts. She lay down on her side, facing the fire, with the saddle cushioning her head. Harrison remained sitting upright, his rifle ready, watching the perimeter of their camp. His vigilance was oddly soothing. Emma realized that for the first time since she had stormed away from the wagon train, she felt safe. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life." Harrison glanced down at her, and in the firelight, she saw a hint of a smile touch his lips. "You're welcome, Miss Townsend. Now get some rest. Morning will come faster than you think." But sleep eluded Emma despite her exhaustion. She lay there, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the wolves, and found herself increasingly aware of Harrison's presence. Every so often, he would move to add wood to the fire, or shift position to ease stiff muscles, and each movement seemed magnified in the intimate space they shared. Around midnight, one of the wolves tried to approach the stream for water. Harrison fired a shot that kicked up dirt near the animal's feet, and the wolf retreated with a startled yelp. The pack grew more restless after that, their howls taking on a frustrated, angry tone. "They're getting agitated," Harrison said quietly. "But they won't risk the fire." "You seem very certain of that," Emma observed. "I've spent a lot of nights in camps like this," Harrison replied. "You learn to read the signs, understand what animals will and won't do. Wolves are smart. They know fire means humans, and humans mean danger." Emma sat up, abandoning her pretense of sleep. "How long have you been living out here?" Harrison fed another stick to the fire, his face thoughtful. "I came west 7 years ago, when I was 18. My father died, and there wasn't anything keeping me in Illinois. I worked my way across the territories, picking up skills, learning how to survive. Eventually, I ended up in Montana, and I found I liked it better than anywhere else I had been." "Don't you get lonely?" Emma asked. "Living such a solitary life." Harrison's gray eyes met hers across the fire. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But loneliness is better than staying somewhere you don't belong. I tried working in towns, following the conventional path. It didn't suit me." Emma understood that sentiment more than he probably realized. "I think that's why I left Philadelphia," she said slowly. "After my parents died, I was living with my aunt and uncle, trying to fit into their idea of what I should be. They meant well, but I felt like I was suffocating. When they decided to move west, I thought it would be a fresh start, a chance to figure out who I really am." "And have you?" Harrison asked. "Figured it out?" "I'm still working on it," Emma admitted with a wry smile, "though tonight has certainly taught me that I'm not as ready for frontier life as I thought I was." Harrison's lips quirked upward. "You made a mistake." But you're still alive. That counts for something. The wilderness has a way of teaching hard lessons fast. Those who learn survive. Those who don't, well, they don't usually get a second chance. They talked through the long night hours, their conversation ranging from the practical to the philosophical. Harrison told her about his work, about the beauty and danger of the Montana wilderness, about the changing seasons and the animals he had encountered. Emma found herself telling him about her life in Philadelphia, about her parents and their small bookshop, about her dreams of adventure that had seemed so foolish until tonight. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the wolves finally withdrew. Harrison watched them disappear into the forest, then stood and stretched, working out the stiffness from sitting up all night. "We should get moving," he said. "Your people will be worried sick." Emma stood as well, feeling the aches and bruises from her ordeal. Her dress was torn and dirty, her hair a complete disaster, but she was alive, and that was what mattered. Harrison saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, and helped Emma mount. As before, he swung up behind her, and they set off through the forest. In the morning light, Emma could see the landscape properly for the first time. They were in a valley surrounded by towering mountains, their peaks still dusted with snow, despite it being late spring. The forest was a mixture of pine and aspen, and a creek ran parallel to their path, its water crystal clear and moving fast with snowmelt. "It's beautiful," Emma said, surprising herself. "It is," Harrison agreed. "People come west for different reasons, but most stay because of this. The land gets into your blood." They rode for about an hour before Harrison's horse suddenly tensed, its ears pricking forward. Harrison immediately reached for his rifle, his body going alert. "What is it?" Emma whispered. "Someone's coming," Harrison replied. 3 horses, moving fast. Minutes later, 3 riders burst into view, Emma's Uncle Thomas, the wagon master, and one of the other men from the train. Their faces registered shock and then profound relief when they saw Emma. "Emma!" her uncle shouted, spurring his horse forward. "Thank God! We've been searching all night." Harrison reined in his horse, and Emma slid down to face her uncle. Thomas Townsend was a stocky man in his 50s, with graying hair and a face weathered from years of hard work. Right now, he looked like he had aged a decade overnight. "I'm sorry, Uncle Thomas," Emma said, tears springing to her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I was foolish and prideful, and I could have gotten killed." Her uncle dismounted and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You're alive. That's all that matters. Your aunt has been beside herself with worry." The wagon master, a grizzled man named Pike, looked at Harrison with sharp, assessing eyes. "You the one who found her?" "Found her being circled by a wolf pack," Harrison replied evenly. "She spent the night at my camp." Pike's expression shifted to one of respect. "We heard the shots and the wolves howling. Figured someone was in trouble, but we couldn't risk searching in the dark with that pack on the hunt." He extended his hand to Harrison. "Name's Samuel Pike. We owe you a debt of gratitude, mister." "Zane. Harrison Zane," Harrison said, shaking the offered hand. "No debt needed. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone would have survived a night with that pack circling," Pike said bluntly. "You know the wilderness. That's clear enough." Thomas Townsend approached Harrison, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Zane, I don't know how to thank you properly. You saved my niece's life. If there's anything we can do, anything at all..." Harrison looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Like I said, no thanks necessary. I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time." But Emma could see that her uncle wasn't going to let this go easily. "Are you headed to Dillon?" Thomas asked. "Eventually," Harrison admitted. "Then please, ride with us the rest of the way. Let us at least feed you properly and give you a place to rest. It's the least we can do." Harrison hesitated, and Emma found herself hoping he would agree. The thought of saying goodbye to him now, after the strange intimacy of their night by the fire, felt abrupt and wrong. "Please," Emma added quietly. "I would feel better knowing you made it safely to town." Harrison's gray eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "All right," he agreed. "I'll ride with you to Dillon." The wagon train was camped in a meadow about 2 miles away, and when they arrived, Emma's Aunt Lydia rushed forward with a cry of relief. She was a thin, nervous woman in her late 40s, and she clutched Emma to her chest with surprising strength. Never do that again, Lydia sobbed. Never, ever do that again. I won't, Aunt Lydia, Emma promised. I swear it. The other families in the wagon train gathered around, all expressing relief at Emma's safe return and curiosity about the man who had rescued her. Harrison endured the attention with stoic patience, answering questions briefly and deflecting praise whenever possible. Pike pulled him aside while Emma was getting cleaned up and changing into fresh clothes. We could use someone like you, the wagon master said bluntly. Someone who knows the territory, who can handle themselves in a crisis. We're 2 days out from Dillon, and the last stretch is through some rough country. I'd sleep easier knowing we had an extra gun who knew what they were doing. Harrison considered this. He had planned to take his time getting to Dillon, checking his trap lines and hunting along the way. But something about this group, about Emma Townsend in particular, made him reluctant to ride off alone. I'll stay with the train until Dillon, he agreed, but I won't take payment for it. Consider it a favor. Pike grinned. You're a strange one, Zane, but I'll take strange and competent over normal and useless any day. Over the next 2 days, Harrison became a fixture around the wagon train. He scouted ahead, checking for dangers and reporting back on the trail conditions. He helped repair a broken wagon wheel with a skill that impressed the other men. In the evenings, he sat by the communal fire and answered questions about the territory, offering advice on everything from hunting to building shelters. And through it all, Emma found her eyes drawn to him again and again. She watched the way he moved, economical and purposeful. She listened to his voice, quiet and steady, as he told stories about his years in the wilderness. She noticed the way children in the train gravitated toward him, sensing his patient nature, and how he never seemed to lose his temper, even when faced with stupid questions or tedious tasks. Emma's aunt noticed her attention and pulled her aside on the second day. Be careful, Lydia warned. Men like that, they're not the settling type. He'll break your heart and move on without a second thought. I barely know him, Aunt Lydia, Emma protested, though she felt her cheeks flush. That's not what your eyes say when you look at him, Lydia replied shrewdly. I was young once too, Emma. I know what attraction looks like. I'm just saying be cautious. We don't know anything about this man except that he lives alone in the wilderness. That should tell you something about his character. But Emma wasn't sure her aunt was right. Yes, Harrison was solitary, but she had seen his kindness, his patience, his quiet competence. He had sat up all night, protecting her from wolves without complaint. He had talked with her like an equal, sharing his thoughts and listening to hers. That didn't seem like the behavior of a heartless drifter. On their last night before reaching Dillon, Emma volunteered to take water to Harrison, who had set up his bedroll slightly apart from the main camp, as was his habit. She found him checking his rifle, preparing for his night watch rotation. I brought you some stew, Emma said, holding out the bowl, and coffee. Harrison looked up, surprised but pleased. Thank you. That's kind of you. Emma sat down on a nearby rock, not quite ready to leave. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. We'll be in Dillon tomorrow, she said. Yes, Harrison agreed, accepting the food. Pike says we should arrive by afternoon if we make good time. What will you do once we get there? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Harrison was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. Sell my furs, resupply, maybe pick up some work. I usually stay in town for a week or two before heading back out. Back out into the wilderness, Emma said, unable to keep a note of disappointment from her voice. Harrison set down the bowl and looked at her directly. That's my life, Emma. It's what I know, what I'm good at. I know, Emma said quickly. I'm not questioning your choices. I just wondered if you ever thought about, well, doing something different. Like what? Harrison asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Emma struggled to articulate the thoughts that had been forming in her mind over the past 2 days. I don't know exactly, but you have skills that would be valuable in so many ways. You could guide settlers, teach people how to survive in this country. You could work as a scout or a ranger. You don't have to be alone all the time. Harrison's expression grew guarded. I'm alone because I choose to be, Emma, not because I don't have options. Why do you choose it? Emma pressed. Loneliness isn't good for anyone. Harrison stood up, moving to look out over the valley. I told you I came west after my father died. What I didn't tell you was that I was engaged when I left Illinois. Her name was Margaret, and we had been planning to marry since we were 15. Emma's heart sank, but she remained silent, letting him continue. When my father died, he left debts. A lot of debts. Everything we owned went to pay them, including the land. I had nothing to offer Margaret except hard work and uncertainty. Her family convinced her to break the engagement, to marry the banker's son instead. She did, and I left. Harrison's voice was flat, emotionless. I learned then that people will let you down. They'll make promises they don't keep. But the wilderness, it's honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. Emma stood and moved to stand beside him. Not everyone is like Margaret, she said softly. Some people keep their promises. Harrison looked down at her, and in his eyes, Emma saw a war between hope and cynicism. Maybe, he said, but I'm not sure I'm willing to risk finding out. That's sad, Emma said honestly, to let one person's betrayal close you off from everyone else. It's not just Margaret, Harrison said. I've seen enough of people to know that most folks are looking out for themselves first. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just how the world works. I prefer to rely on myself. Then why did you save me? Emma challenged. Why did you risk your life for a stranger if you think people are only looking out for themselves? Harrison didn't have an immediate answer for that. He studied Emma's face, taking in her determined expression, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. I don't know, he admitted finally. Instinct, maybe. Or stupidity. I don't think it was either of those things, Emma said. I think you're better than you give yourself credit for. I think you do care about people, even if you won't admit it to yourself. Harrison's lips quirked into a slight smile. You seem pretty sure about that for someone who has known me for 2 days. Sometimes 2 days is enough to see what matters, Emma replied. You've shown me more in 2 days than some people reveal in years. They stood there in the fading light, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Harrison reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind Emma's ear, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. You're a remarkable woman, Emma Townsend, he said quietly. But I'm not the right man for you. You deserve someone who can give you stability, a home, a proper life. I can't offer any of those things. Maybe I don't want those things, Emma said, her heart pounding. Maybe I want something different. You say that now, Harrison replied, dropping his hand. But frontier life is hard, Emma. It's cold winters and uncertain summers and work that never ends. It's isolation and hardship and constantly struggling against the elements. The romance of it wears off fast when you're facing reality. You're making a lot of assumptions about what I can and can't handle, Emma said, feeling a spark of anger. I made one mistake, one error in judgment, and now you think you know everything about me. That's not fair, Harrison said. Isn't it? Emma challenged. You're dismissing me without giving me a chance. You're assuming I'm like Margaret, that I'll run at the first sign of difficulty. But you don't know me at all, Harrison Zane. With that, Emma turned and walked back toward the wagons, leaving Harrison staring after her in the gathering darkness. She was furious at him, at herself, at the entire situation. She had no right to expect anything from this man, no claim on his future or his heart. But something had sparked between them during that long night by the fire, and she couldn't just ignore it. Emma barely slept that night, her mind churning with confused emotions. Part of her was angry at Harrison for his assumptions and his refusal to consider possibilities beyond his solitary existence. Part of her was angry at herself for developing feelings for a man she barely knew, and part of her was simply sad, mourning something that had never really begun. The next morning, the wagon train broke camp early, everyone eager to reach Dillon and the relative safety and comfort it represented. Harrison rode ahead as scout, keeping his distance from the main group. Emma helped her aunt pack up their belongings and tried not to watch for glimpses of him on the trail ahead. Dillon appeared in the early afternoon, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley between mountains. It was larger than Emma had expected, clearly a thriving hub for the surrounding ranches and mining operations. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with a general store, a bank, a hotel, 2 saloons, a blacksmith, and various other establishments. Pike brought the wagon train to a halt in a large open area at the edge of town where other travelers had camped. We'll rest here for 3 days, he announced. Give everyone time to resupply and recover before those continuing on head out. For those of you making Dillon your home, welcome to your new town. The Townsends were staying. Thomas had secured a job managing the general store, and they had rented a small house on the outskirts of town. As Emma helped unload their belongings, she saw Harrison speaking with Pike, the two men shaking hands. Then Harrison mounted his horse and rode toward the main street without looking back. Emma told herself it was for the best. He had made his position clear. There was no future with a man who had walled himself off from human connection. She needed to focus on building a life here in Dillon, on helping her aunt and uncle establish themselves, on finding her own place in this frontier community. But as the days passed, Emma found herself thinking about Harrison constantly. She would be helping in the store, measuring out flour or cutting fabric, and suddenly remember the steady beat of his heart against her back as they rode through the darkness. She would be preparing dinner and recall the sound of his voice as he told her about the wilderness he loved. She would lie in bed at night and see again the look in his eyes when he had touched her face, that mixture of longing and restraint. A week after their arrival, Emma was sweeping the front steps of the general store when a group of ranchers rode into town. They were loud and boisterous, clearly having spent time in one of the saloons already, despite it being early afternoon. One of them, a burly man with a thick beard, noticed Emma and made a comment to his companions that caused them all to laugh. Emma ignored them, continuing her work. But the bearded man dismounted and approached the steps, his movements unsteady. "Hey there, pretty lady," he slurred. "You new in town? I haven't seen you before." "I'm working," Emma said firmly. "Please move along." Don't be like that," the man said, reaching for her arm. "I just want to be friendly." Emma jerked away from him, her heart racing. The other ranchers had dismounted now, forming a loose circle around the steps. She felt trapped, vulnerable in a way that reminded her sickeningly of that night in the forest with the wolves circling. "The lady asked you to move along," a quiet voice said from behind the ranchers. Emma's breath caught. Harrison stood there, his rifle held loosely in one hand, his gray eyes cold and hard. He looked dangerous in a way she had never seen before, and the ranchers seemed to sense it too. They shuffled nervously, suddenly less confident. "We don't want any trouble," one of them said. "We were just talking to the lady." "And now you're done talking," Harrison said, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. "Get on your horses and ride out." The bearded man bristled at being ordered around, but when he met Harrison's eyes, something in that steady gaze made him reconsider. Muttering under his breath, he remounted his horse. The group rode off down the street, casting dark looks back at Harrison. Harrison waited until they were out of sight, then turned to Emma. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Emma said, though her hands were shaking. "Thank you. Again. You seem to make a habit of rescuing me." "Those men were drunk and stupid," Harrison said. "They might have backed off on their own, but I didn't want to take the chance." An awkward silence fell between them. Emma hadn't seen Harrison since the wagon train arrived, though she had heard from others that he was still in town, staying at the boarding house and doing some work for the local ranchers. "I've been meaning to come by," Harrison said finally, "to see how you were settling in." "We're doing well," Emma replied. "My uncle started work at the store, and we've moved into our house. It's small, but comfortable." Harrison nodded, scuffing his boot against the dusty street. He looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Emma waited, her heart beating faster with each passing second. "About what I said before we reached town," Harrison began. "I was too harsh. You were right that I was making assumptions. I'm sorry for that." "Apology accepted," Emma said quietly. "The thing is," Harrison continued, his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder, "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, about that night by the fire, about the things you said. You've gotten under my skin, Emma Townsend, and I don't quite know what to do about it." Emma's pulse raced. "What do you want to do about it?" Harrison finally met her eyes. "I want to spend time with you, get to know you properly, but I also want to be honest about who I am and what I can offer, which isn't much by conventional standards." "Let me be the judge of what's enough," Emma said, hope blossoming in her chest. "I'm not asking you to change who you are, Harrison. I'm just asking for a chance to see where this might lead." A slow smile spread across Harrison's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "All right, then. Would you do me the honor of having dinner with me tonight? There's a restaurant at the hotel that's supposed to be decent." "I would love that," Emma said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. That evening, Emma changed into her best dress, a dark blue cotton with small white flowers embroidered around the collar. It was simple but flattering, and Lydia helped her pin up her hair in a style that was both practical and pretty. "So you're going to pursue this man despite my warnings," Lydia said, though her tone was more resigned than angry. "I am," Emma confirmed. "I know it's a risk, Aunt Lydia, but nothing worthwhile comes without risk." Lydia sighed. "You're right about that, I suppose. Just promise me you'll be careful with your heart." "I promise," Emma said, squeezing her aunt's hand. Harrison arrived promptly at 6, cleaned up, and wearing what were clearly his best clothes: dark trousers, a white shirt, and a leather vest. He had shaved and combed his hair, and Emma thought he looked incredibly handsome, despite his obvious discomfort with being so formal. They walked to the hotel together through the cooling evening air. Dylan was settling into its nighttime rhythms, with lights beginning to appear in windows and the saloons filling with cowboys and miners seeking entertainment after long days of work. The hotel restaurant was indeed decent, with clean tablecloths and a menu that offered real variety. Harrison ordered steak, Emma chose roasted chicken, and they both had coffee that was actually hot and fresh. As they ate, they talked about everything and nothing, falling back into the easy conversation they had shared that night by the fire. Harrison told her about his week, about the work he had been doing, breaking horses for a local rancher. Emma shared stories about learning to work in the general store, about the various characters who came through, and the gossip that seemed to be the lifeblood of small-town existence. "It's different from Philadelphia," Emma said. "Everyone knows everyone here, and they all want to know your business. But there's also a kindness to it. When the Baker family's youngest got sick last week, half the town showed up with food and offers of help." "That's the frontier for you," Harrison said. "People depend on each other out here. You can't survive alone, not really, even if you want to." "Is that why you keep coming back to Dylan?" Emma asked. "Because you need the connection, even if you won't admit it?" Harrison considered this. "Maybe," he admitted. "I told myself it was just practical, a place to resupply and sell furs. But you might be right that there's more to it than that." After dinner, they walked through town, eventually ending up at the edge of the settlement, where the buildings gave way to open grassland. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. In the distance, the mountains loomed like sleeping giants. "I need to tell you something," Harrison said, as they stood looking out at the landscape. "I'm planning to head back into the wilderness in a few days. There's a valley about 3 days' ride from here where I have a cabin. I spend most of my time there during the summer and fall, trapping and hunting." Emma felt her stomach clench with disappointment. "How long will you be gone?" "Usually until late autumn," Harrison said. "I come back to Dylan when the first serious snows hit, stay through the worst of winter, then head out again in early spring. 6 months. He would be gone for 6 months." Emma tried to process this, tried to figure out what it meant for whatever was developing between them. "I know that's a long time," Harrison continued quietly, "and I know it's not fair to ask you to wait, but I also can't give up my life, my work. It's who I am." "I understand," Emma said, though her heart ached. "I wouldn't ask you to give it up, but 6 months is a long time to be apart, especially when we're just starting to know each other." Harrison turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know, I've been thinking about it constantly, trying to figure out if there's another way. But the truth is, I need to check on my cabin, maintain my trap lines, build up supplies for winter. It's how I make my living." Emma looked up at him, at his serious gray eyes, and the moonlight turning his dark hair silver. She thought about the past 2 weeks, about how much this man had come to mean to her in such a short time. The thought of him leaving, of not seeing him for months, was painful. But the thought of asking him to change his entire life for her was impossible. "Then we'll make the most of the next few days," Emma said, forcing brightness into her voice. "And when autumn comes, you'll come back to Dylan, and we'll see where we stand." Harrison pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. Emma rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the same sound that had comforted her that terrifying night in the forest. She felt Harrison's lips brush the top of her head, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. "You're an extraordinary woman," Harrison murmured. "I don't deserve you." "Stop saying things like that," Emma said, pulling back to look at him. "I'm not a prize to be deserved or earned. I'm just a person, trying to figure out life like everyone else. And I happen to think you're pretty extraordinary too." Harrison smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. Then he bent his head and kissed her, and Emma felt the world tilt and rearrange itself around this moment. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Emma answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the emotion churning inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come back," he promised. "As soon as the first snow hits, I'll be back in Dillon." "I'll be here," Emma promised in return. They spent the next 3 days almost entirely in each other's company. Harrison showed Emma around Dillon, introducing her to people he knew, sharing the history of the town and the surrounding area. Emma brought him to the house for dinner, where he charmed her aunt with his polite manners and impressed her uncle with his knowledge of the territory. On the last night before Harrison was to leave, they sat together on the porch of the Townsend house, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Emma was trying to memorize everything about this moment. The way Harrison's hand felt wrapped around hers, the warmth of his shoulder pressed against hers, the scent of pine and leather that clung to him. "I wish you didn't have to go," Emma said quietly. "I know," Harrison replied, "but this is my work, Emma. It's how I support myself. I can't just abandon it." "I'm not asking you to," Emma said quickly. "I understand. It's just hard." Harrison squeezed her hand. "It's hard for me, too. I've never had someone to leave before, never had a reason to want to stay. You've changed things for me." "Is that good or bad?" Emma asked. "Good," Harrison said without hesitation. "Scary, but good. You've reminded me that there's more to life than just surviving alone in the wilderness." They kissed goodbye the next morning as Harrison prepared to ride out. Emma tried not to cry, but a few tears escaped anyway. Harrison gently wiped them away with his thumb, his own eyes suspiciously bright. 6 months, he said, "and then I'll be back, I promise." 6 months, Emma echoed. "I'll count the days." Harrison swung up onto his horse, taking one last long look at Emma standing on the street in the early morning light. Then he turned his horse toward the mountains and rode out of town without looking back. Emma watched until he was just a distant speck on the horizon, then finally turned and went inside to begin the long wait. The summer passed slowly for Emma. She threw herself into work at the general store, learning every aspect of the business. She helped her aunt establish their household, sewing curtains and planting a small garden. She made friends with other young women in town, joining in quilting circles and church socials. She built a life in Dillon, Montana, and tried not to think constantly about a gray-eyed man alone in his mountain cabin. But Harrison was never far from her thoughts. Every sunset reminded her of that evening they had walked to the edge of town. Every full moon brought back memories of their kiss in the moonlight. She found herself scanning every group of riders that came into town, hoping against hope that one would be Harrison returning early. The other women in town noticed her distraction and teased her gently about her absent cowboy. Emma bore their jokes with good humor, refusing to confirm or deny anything, but unable to hide the blush that rose to her cheeks whenever Harrison's name was mentioned. In late July, a group of miners came through town with news of a grizzly bear that had been causing trouble in the high country, destroying cabins and raiding supplies. Emma's blood ran cold when she heard them describing the location. Recognizing it as near where Harrison had said his cabin was located, she told herself not to worry, that Harrison knew how to handle himself in the wilderness, but the fear nagged at her anyway, a constant low-level anxiety that colored everything else. August brought a heat wave that turned the valley into an oven. Emma worked in the stifling store, mopping her forehead and dreaming of cool mountain streams. She wondered what Harrison was doing, whether he was hot too, or if the high altitude kept things cooler. She wondered if he thought about her as often as she thought about him. September arrived with a blessed cooling of the temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the aspens on the mountainsides. Emma began to watch the weather obsessively, hoping for signs of an early winter that would bring Harrison back sooner. But the days remained clear and mild, beautiful, but torturous in their perfection. On a crisp morning in early October, Emma was helping an elderly customer select buttons when she heard a commotion outside. Through the store window, she saw a group of people gathering in the street, all looking at something. She excused herself and went to investigate, her heart beginning to pound with a mixture of hope and fear. Harrison rode down the main street, looking thinner and more weathered than Emma remembered, but unmistakably himself. He was leading a pack horse loaded with furs and supplies, and his eyes scanned the buildings and people until they found what they were looking for. Emma stood frozen on the steps of the general store, unable to believe he was really there. It was too early. The first snow hadn't hit yet. What was he doing back? Harrison dismounted and walked toward her, and the crowd parted to let him through. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her with an expression that held uncertainty and hope, and something that looked a lot like love. "You're early," Emma managed to say, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "I know," Harrison said. "I couldn't stay away. I tried to last until the snow. I really did. But every day that passed, all I could think about was you. Whether you were safe, whether you were happy, whether you had decided I was a fool and moved on. Finally, I realized that my cabin, my trap lines, none of it mattered as much as getting back to you." Emma felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling so wide, her face hurt. "You came back for me." "I came back for you," Harrison confirmed. "If you'll still have me. I know I've been gone nearly 5 months instead of 6, but that was still too long. I don't want to spend any more time apart from you, Emma. I don't want to go back to that lonely cabin and pretend that solitude is what I want. You've ruined me for the isolated life." Emma laughed through her tears and ran down the steps, throwing herself into Harrison's arms. He caught her and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. The gathered crowd broke into applause and cheers, clearly having figured out what was happening. When Harrison set Emma back on her feet, he took both her hands in his. "I need to tell you something. I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past months, and I've made some decisions. I'm not giving up trapping and hunting entirely, but I'm going to base myself here in Dillon. I can do day trips, maybe week-long excursions, but I won't be gone for months at a time anymore. And I want to start offering guide services, teaching people who want to learn wilderness skills. I think I can make a decent living that way and still stay close to town." "You don't have to change your whole life for me," Emma protested, though her heart soared at his words. "I'm not changing for you," Harrison said. "I'm changing for us, for the possibility of a future together. You were right that night by the fire, Emma. I was using my solitary lifestyle as a shield, protecting myself from getting hurt again. But being without you these past months has hurt worse than anything Margaret ever did to me. I'd rather risk my heart with you than spend the rest of my life safe and alone." Emma reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I love you, Harrison Zane. I fell in love with you that night in the forest, sitting by the fire and talking until dawn. I've been in love with you every day since, and I will love you every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." "I love you too," Harrison said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've never said that to anyone before, and meant it the way I mean it with you. You're my home, Emma. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." Harrison kissed her then, right there in the middle of the street with half of Dillon watching, and Emma kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and love from 5 months of separation. The crowd cheered louder, and someone whistled, but Emma barely heard any of it. Her whole world had narrowed to this man, this moment, this perfect reunion. When they finally broke apart, Thomas Townsend was standing on the steps of the general store, grinning broadly. "Mr. Zane, I think you and I need to have a conversation. Come by the house for dinner tonight." "Yes, sir," Harrison said, looking suddenly nervous in a way Emma found endearing. That evening, Harrison presented himself at the Townsend house with a bouquet of wildflowers for Lydia and a bottle of whiskey for Thomas. The dinner was pleasant but tense, with Harrison clearly aware that he was being evaluated as a potential husband for Emma. After the meal, Thomas invited Harrison into the small sitting room, while Emma and Lydia cleaned up in the kitchen. Emma strained to hear the conversation through the thin walls, but could only catch occasional words. "Your intentions toward my niece," Thomas said firmly. "Completely honorable," Harrison replied. "I want to marry her, sir, with your permission. I know I don't have much to offer by traditional standards, no land, no established business. But I'm hardworking, honest, and I love her more than anything in this world. I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making sure she's safe and happy." There was a long silence, and Emma held her breath. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his voice warmer. "Emma has been orphaned once already, Mr. Zane. She's the closest thing Lydia and I have to a daughter. If I give you permission to marry her, I need to know that you'll never leave her the way her parents were taken from her. I need to know she'll always have someone she can count on." "You have my word," Harrison said solemnly. "I'll never abandon her. I know what it's like to lose people, to be alone. I would never put Emma through that if I had any choice in the matter. All right then, Thomas said. You have my blessing, though I suspect Emma would marry you with or without it, stubborn girl that she is. Harrison laughed, a sound of pure relief. Thank you, sir. You won't regret this, I promise. When Harrison emerged from the sitting room, his face was flushed but happy. He caught Emma's eye and nodded, and she felt her heart soar with joy. Her uncle had given his blessing. They could really do this, build a life together. Harrison proposed formally the next day, taking Emma to the spot at the edge of town where they had stood under the moonlight months ago. He got down on one knee and pulled out a ring he had made himself, a simple silver band with a small turquoise stone set in it. This isn't fancy, Harrison said, his hands shaking slightly as he held out the ring. But I made it myself, and the stone comes from a place in the mountains that's special to me. Emma Townsend, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on building a life with an ex-trapper who's still figuring out how to live in civilization? Yes, Emma said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. Though you should know you're not getting a refined city girl. You're getting a woman who's still learning how to live on the frontier. Perfect, Harrison said, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. We can figure it out together. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Dillon. Emma wore a cream-colored dress that Lydia and the other women had helped her make, and Harrison wore a new suit that Thomas had insisted on buying for him. The entire town turned out for the wedding, eager to celebrate the romance that had become local legend. Pike was there, grinning broadly and claiming credit for bringing them together by letting Harrison ride with the wagon train. The rancher Harrison had been working for was there, along with several other locals who had come to know and respect the quiet cowboy. Emma's small circle of friends surrounded her, all of them teary-eyed and excited. As Emma walked down the aisle toward Harrison, she thought about the night in the forest that had changed her life. If she hadn't been foolish enough to storm off from the wagon train, if the wolves hadn't circled her camp, if Harrison hadn't been close enough to hear the commotion, none of this would be happening. Sometimes, she thought, the worst mistakes could lead to the best outcomes. Harrison's eyes never left her face as she approached. When she reached him and took his hands, she felt the calluses and scars from his years in the wilderness, evidence of the hard life he had led. But she also felt the warmth and strength, the steadiness that had drawn her to him from the beginning. The minister led them through their vows, and when it came time for Harrison to speak, his voice was clear and strong. I, Harrison Zane, take you, Emma Townsend, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you through all the challenges life brings. I promise to build a home with you, wherever that home may be, and I promise to never let you face the wolves alone again. Emma smiled through her tears at that last promise, understanding all the layers of meaning behind it. I, Emma Townsend, take you, Harrison Zane, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, and believe in you even when you doubt yourself. I promise to build a life with you that honors both who we were and who we're becoming. And I promise to always stay close, just like you asked that night. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Emma with a tenderness that made the whole congregation sigh. They walked back down the aisle together as Mr. and Mrs. Zane, ready to face whatever the frontier had in store for them. Harrison had rented a small house on the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it felt like a palace to both of them. That first night as husband and wife, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge, and talked about their plans for the future. I've been thinking about your idea, Harrison said, about teaching people wilderness skills. I talked to Pike, and he's interested in partnering with me. He knows people coming west who need guides and instruction. We could build something real here. That's wonderful, Emma said, squeezing his hand. And I've been learning so much about running a store. Uncle Thomas says I have a head for business. Maybe someday we could even open our own place, selling supplies specifically for people heading into the wilderness. I like that idea, Harrison said. We make a good team, don't we? The best, Emma agreed. Their first year of marriage was full of adjustments and challenges. Harrison struggled with being in town full-time, sometimes growing restless and irritable when he went too long without time in the wilderness. Emma learned to recognize the signs and would encourage him to take a few days away, to go hunting or fishing in the mountains. He always came back refreshed, grateful for her understanding. Emma had her own struggles, particularly with the harsh Montana winter. The cold was unlike anything she had experienced in Philadelphia, and the isolation when snow blocked the roads for days at a time was difficult. But Harrison taught her skills to pass the time, how to tan leather, how to identify animal tracks from illustrations in his books, how to read weather patterns in the sky. They worked together to build Harrison's guide business, with Emma handling the correspondence and bookkeeping, while Harrison did the actual guiding and teaching. By their first anniversary, they had a steady stream of clients, and Harrison's reputation as an honest, skilled guide had spread throughout the territory. Emma also continued working at her uncle's store, though now as a partner rather than just help. She had a talent for understanding what people needed and for managing inventory, and the business thrived under her attention. Between her work at the store and Harrison's guiding business, they were financially stable in a way neither had been alone. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Emma discovered she was pregnant. She told Harrison one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, processing the information, and then a slow, wondering smile spread across his face. "A baby?" he said. "We're going to have a baby?" "We are," Emma confirmed, her own smile matching his. "Sometime in late October, the doctor thinks." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully, as if she might break. "I'm going to be a father," he murmured against her hair. "I never thought I would be, never thought I would have a family. Emma, you've given me everything I didn't know I needed." The pregnancy was mostly uneasy, but manageable. Emma continued working at the store until her 6th month, when the long days on her feet became too much. Harrison fussed over her constantly, worried about every twinge and discomfort, until Emma finally had to tell him gently that she was pregnant, not dying, and needed him to calm down. On a cold night in late October, with the first snow of the season falling softly outside, Emma went into labor. Harrison rode through the storm to fetch the doctor and the midwife, then spent the next 12 hours pacing the small house like a caged animal. Lydia stayed with Emma, coaching her through the contractions and offering encouragement. Just after dawn, as the sun broke through the clouds and painted the fresh snow in shades of pink and gold, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He had dark hair like his mother and gray eyes like his father, and he howled his displeasure at being born with impressive lung power. Harrison held his son for the first time with shaking hands, tears streaming unabashedly down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Emma, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel Thomas Zane, after the wagon master who had helped bring them together, and Emma's uncle, who had welcomed Harrison into the family. Little Sam was a happy baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Harrison was a devoted father, singing to Sam in the evenings and carrying him around in a sling that Emma made so the baby could be close while Harrison worked. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emma managed the household and continued her work with the store from home, handling correspondence and bookkeeping. Harrison's guide business continued to grow, though he was careful never to take jobs that would keep him away from home for more than a few days. They saved money steadily, planning for the future. When Sam was 2 years old, Emma became pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a surprise, but no less joyful. Their daughter was born on a warm summer evening, with significantly less drama than Sam's dramatic entrance into the world. They named her Rose Margaret Zane, the middle name a gesture of healing and forgiveness on Harrison's part. Rose had her mother's dark eyes and her father's serious expression, though she proved to have a mischievous streak that kept her parents on their toes. Sam adored his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her and making her laugh with his antics. As the years passed, the Zane family became a fixture in Dillon. Harrison's guide service evolved into a full wilderness education program, teaching not just hunting and trapping, but also survival skills, tracking, and land management. Emma opened a small shop next to the general store, specializing in wilderness supplies and equipment. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone. On their 10th anniversary, Harrison took Emma back to the spot where they had been married. The church had been renovated, made larger to accommodate Dillon's growing population, but the location was the same. They stood hand in hand, watching Sam and Rose play in the churchyard, and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" Harrison asked. "Marrying a man who was more comfortable in the wilderness than in civilization?" "Never," Emma said firmly. You've given me adventure, love, a family, and a purpose. What more could I possibly want?" "I was so scared that night in the forest," Harrison admitted. "Not of the wolves, but of what I felt when I looked at you. I knew you were going to change my life, and change was the last thing I wanted." "And now?" Emma asked, smiling. "Now I can't imagine my life without the changes you brought," Harrison said. "You took a man who was running from connection and taught him that love is worth the risk." They kissed, a sweet echo of that first kiss under the moonlight 10 years ago. Sam made a disgusted noise from across the yard, and Rose giggled, and Harrison and Emma broke apart laughing. That evening, after the children were in bed, Harrison and Emma sat on their porch, as was their habit. The house was no longer the tiny two-room structure they had started with. They had expanded it over the years, adding bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen. But they had kept the porch, that space where they had dreamed together under the stars. "I've been thinking," Harrison said, "about expanding the business again. There's talk of the railroad pushing through this way in a few years. More people will be coming west, and they'll need guidance." "That's a wonderful opportunity," Emma said. "We could write a guidebook, maybe, for settlers. Tips on surviving the first year, what supplies to bring, how to choose land." "You're brilliant," Harrison said, kissing her forehead. "Have I mentioned that today?" "Not since this morning," Emma teased. They sat in companionable silence, watching the mountains darken against the sunset sky. Emma thought about the frightened young woman she had been, lost in the forest with wolves circling her camp. That Emma had been running from herself as much as from her aunt's criticism, unsure of who she was or what she wanted. The woman she had become was stronger, more certain. She had found her purpose in this frontier town, building businesses and raising children and creating a life that was rich in ways that had nothing to do with material wealth. And she had found love with a man who understood that strength and gentleness weren't opposites, but complements. Harrison's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers, in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Emma asked. "For not giving up on me," Harrison replied. "For seeing past my defenses to the man I could be. For loving me when I barely knew how to love myself. For giving me a family and a home and a reason to wake up grateful every morning." "You did the same for me," Emma said. "We saved each other, Harrison. That's what love is supposed to do." As the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky, Emma heard the distant howl of wolves in the mountains. The sound that had once terrified her now seemed almost beautiful, a reminder of where their story had begun. Harrison heard it too, and squeezed her hand. "Stay close," he murmured, echoing those words he had spoken so long ago. "Always," Emma promised. "Always." Inside the house, Sam called out that he couldn't sleep, and Rose started fussing in her crib. Emma and Harrison looked at each other and smiled, then rose together to attend to their children. This was their life now, full of small challenges and large joys, of mundane tasks elevated by love, of a partnership built on trust and tested by time. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their children. Sam grew into a young man who inherited his father's love of the wilderness and his mother's head for business. Rose developed a talent for healing, apprenticing with the town doctor and eventually becoming a skilled nurse. Both children knew the story of how their parents had met, how wolves circling a camp had brought Harrison and Emma together, and they never tired of hearing it told. Harrison and Emma grew older together, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their bodies showing the accumulated aches and pains of a hard life. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, each shared challenge, each moment of joy or sorrow. When Harrison turned 50, Emma surprised him with a week-long trip back to the valley where his old cabin still stood. They rode out together, just the two of them, leaving Sam and Rose to mind the businesses. The cabin was weathered but sound, and Harrison spent several days making repairs while Emma explored the area. One evening, they made camp by a stream, building a fire as the sun set. Emma watched the flames dance and remembered another fire, another night when her whole world had narrowed to survival, and a stranger's steady voice promising protection. "This is where it all started," Harrison said, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "Our journey together." "Do you ever miss it?" Emma asked. "The solitary life, before you had all the responsibilities of family and business?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, considering. I miss the simplicity sometimes, he admitted. The way your only concerns were where to find game and whether your fire would last through the night. But I don't miss the loneliness. I didn't realize how lonely I was until I met you and understood what it meant to share my life with someone. I'm glad you were there that night, Emma said softly. I'm glad you heard the wolves and came to investigate. I'm glad you were the kind of man who would risk yourself for a stranger. I think I knew, even then, Harrison said. When I saw you standing there by your little fire, trying to be brave despite your fear, I knew you were going to be important to me. I just didn't know how much. They made love that night under the stars, a celebration of all the years behind them and all the years still to come. And when Emma woke in the morning, wrapped in Harrison's arms with the sound of the stream gurgling nearby, she felt a profound sense of contentment. This was where she belonged, in the wilderness with the man she loved, connected to the land and the sky and the enduring cycle of life. They returned to Dillon refreshed and renewed, ready to continue building their legacy. The guidebook they had discussed years ago finally came together, a comprehensive manual for settlers that combined Harrison's wilderness expertise with Emma's practical advice. It sold well, bringing in a steady income and establishing them as authorities on frontier life. The railroad did eventually come through, just as predicted, and Dillon transformed from a rough frontier town into a more established community. New businesses opened, new families arrived, and the character of the place shifted subtly. Harrison and Emma adapted to the changes, finding ways to preserve what they loved about the old Dillon while welcoming the opportunities the new growth brought. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. Half the town showed up, including Pike, now retired but still sharp as ever. He made a speech about how he had known from the moment he saw Harrison ride into Emma's camp that something special was brewing. I've guided a lot of wagon trains in my day, Pike said, his voice carrying across the crowd. Seen a lot of people come west looking for new starts. But I've never seen two people who belong together more completely than Harrison and Emma Zane. They're proof that sometimes the worst situations can lead to the best outcomes, and that love can bloom even in the wildest places. The crowd applauded, and Emma felt tears prickling her eyes. Harrison pulled her close and kissed her temple, and she leaned into him, marveling at how this man who had once preferred solitude now stood comfortably in the middle of a crowd celebrating their love. That night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet, Emma and Harrison returned to their porch. It had become their sanctuary, the place where they processed the events of each day and planned for the future. 20 years, Emma said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you rode into my camp. Other times, it feels like we've been together forever. Both things can be true, Harrison said. Every day with you feels new, but also like exactly where I'm meant to be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. Emma thought about all they had built together, the businesses, the home, the children who were now finding their own paths in the world. She thought about the community they had helped shape and the countless lives they had touched through their work. But more than any of that, she thought about the partnership they had forged. Harrison had taught her strength and resilience, had shown her that she was capable of far more than she had believed. She had taught him trust and connection, had shown him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but courage. Together, they had become more than the sum of their individual parts. I love you, Emma said, the words as natural as breathing after 20 years of marriage. I love you too, Harrison replied, his voice warm with emotion. More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow. Inside the house, a floorboard creaked as one of the children moved around. Even though Sam and Rose were grown, they both still lived in Dillon, staying close to their parents. Sam had started his own guide service, following in his father's footsteps, while Rose worked at the town's growing medical clinic. Both had brought their parents' grandchildren, carrying on the Zane family legacy. Emma rested her head on Harrison's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. This simple act, sitting together in the darkness, had become the foundation of their relationship. Whether they were discussing problems or celebrating victories, grieving losses, or welcoming new life, they faced it all from this porch, side by side. Do you remember what you said to me that night? Emma asked softly. When the wolves were circling? Stay close. I'll keep them away, Harrison quoted. Of course I remember. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever challenges we face, whatever wolves circle our camp, I'll be here to protect you. And I'll be here for you, Emma added. That's what we do. We protect each other." The moon rose over the mountains, full and bright, casting silver light across the valley. In its glow, Emma could see Harrison's face, lined now with age but still handsome, still the face she loved more than any other. His gray eyes met hers, and in them she saw the accumulation of 20 years of shared memories, shared dreams, shared life. "No regrets?" Harrison asked. "Not a single one," Emma replied firmly. "You?" "None," Harrison said. "You gave me everything I thought I didn't want and turned out to need desperately. You gave me a reason to be brave enough to let someone in." They kissed, a tender affirmation of vows spoken 20 years ago and renewed every day since. When they finally went inside to bed, walking hand in hand through the house they had built together, Emma felt a deep sense of peace. This was home. Not the building, but the man beside her. Not the place, but the love they had created. As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, Harrison's arms wrapped around her, she thought one last time about that terrified young woman in the forest. That Emma had been lost in more ways than one, unsure of her place in the world or her own capabilities. She had needed the wolves to force her to confront her fears, and she had needed Harrison to show her that love was worth the risk of being hurt. But she had also needed to find her own strength, to discover that she was capable of building a life in this harsh, beautiful frontier. The woman she had become was a product of both the wilderness and the man who loved her, shaped by challenges and softened by joy. Harrison murmured something in his sleep, his arms tightening around Emma. She smiled and snuggled closer, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and pine and home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to build on what they had created. But tonight, there was only this: two people who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen, every day since, to stay close. Outside, a wolf howled in the distant mountains, its call lonely and haunting. But Emma no longer feared that sound. Instead, she heard it as a reminder of where she and Harrison had begun, of the journey that had brought them together. The wilderness had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately blessed them with a love that had endured through 2 decades of frontier life. And as Emma finally slipped into sleep, secure in Harrison's embrace, she knew with absolute certainty that this love would endure for all the years to come. They had faced down wolves together, built a life from nothing, and created a family that would carry their legacy forward. Whatever challenges the future held, they would face them as they had faced everything, side by side, hand in hand, hearts intertwined. The story that had begun with fear and wolves and a cowboy's promise had become an epic of love and partnership and enduring commitment. And it was far from over. There were grandchildren to spoil, businesses to nurture, and countless more sunsets to watch from their beloved porch. There was a whole future still to be lived, together. But tonight, this moment was enough. This perfect peace, this deep contentment, this love that had survived and thrived against all odds. Emma Townsend Zane had found her home in the Montana wilderness and in the heart of a man who had promised to keep the wolves away. And Harrison Zane had found his home in a woman brave enough to stay close, even when the world seemed dark and dangerous. Together, they had built something beautiful. Together, they would continue building it for the rest of their days. And when their story was finally complete, it would be a testament to the transformative power of love, the strength of partnership, and the courage it takes to let someone in. It would be a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. It would be their story, written in the wild heart of Montana, sealed with a promise made on a night when wolves circled and a cowboy vowed to protect the woman who would become his everything. And it would have the only ending worth having: 2 people, deeply in love, facing whatever came next, with the certainty that together they could handle anything. The end.